NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
Like Kathy said, we are here today to talk about false confessions, particularly false confessions in sex cases. There are three sort of segments that I want to talk about today. First, the general phenomenon of false confessions. How does police interrogation work in general? Second, I want to show you real interrogation clips from an interrogation that produced a false confession, not in a sex case, in a murder case, but one that illustrates the problems with police interrogation that can cause false confessions. And then third, I want to show you a child sex abuse interrogation that led to a confession that I believe is false, using techniques that maybe wouldn't necessarily cross your mind at first as coercive. So let's kick this off. We know, as of today, of about 350 or so proven false confession cases. These are cases in which somebody came into the interrogation room, was brought there by police, was questioned about a serious crime, usually rape or murder, confessed in great detail, signed a statement, or confessed on videotape, was convicted on the basis of that confession. And then years later, an organization came along, did DNA testing, and proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that this person was in fact factually innocent and the confession was completely false. We know of hundreds of these cases. But here's what I find fascinating about these cases. These proven false confessions are detailed, and they sound believable. They're filled with information, often accurate information about how the crime happened. And we're going to talk today about how that happens. But that's one of the myths about false confessions. That it would be obvious when a confession is false because it would sound fake. It would sound phony. You could see right through it because the person wouldn't know what they're talking about. That's not true. In these cases, the confessions are very believable, very detailed, very plausible, sometimes very accurate. Another myth about false confessions is that, well, that's just for kids or the mentally limited. I would never falsely confess to a crime that I didn't commit. That's not true either. The annals of proven false confession cases are filled not just with kids and the mentally limited, but with people just like you and me, street smart kids, honor roll students, white-collar professionals. Everybody has their breaking point. And psychological police interrogation is designed to identify and exploit that breaking point. Which brings me to another myth about false confessions. People say, well, I could easily understand why somebody might falsely confess if they were beaten, right, or tortured. It's easy to understand why you might do that under physical duress. But in this body of false confessions, the vast majority of them, nobody laid a finger on these suspects. These are cases that were of false confessions that were elicited by psychological tactics, usually psychological tactics alone. Okay, so the three pathways to a false confession. Generally speaking, there are three errors that take place during police investigation that can increase the likelihood of a false confession. We're going to talk about those errors today before we go into the videos of real false confessions. So the first one is what we call the misclassification error. This answers the question, how did the wrong person get inside the interrogation room in the first place? Right? Why did the police interrogate the wrong person? The second error is the coercion error. Once you've got that wrong person inside the interrogation room, how are they motivated to confess to a crime that they didn't commit? And the third error is the contamination error. Once you've got the innocent person inside the interrogation room, once they've been motivated to confess to a crime they didn't commit, how do they know what to say if they weren't even there? These are the three errors. So let's start with misclassification. This is the question, how did that innocent person get inside the interrogation room in the first place? So to understand misclassification, you have to understand a little bit more about police questioning. There are, generally speaking, two stages of police questioning. There's the interview, and then there's the interrogation. The interview is just what you might think, a lot of information gathering, asking of open-ended questions. Where were you when this crime happened? Did you know the victim? Why might somebody do this to him or her? Open-ended information gathering questions. The interrogation is very different, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But let's focus for a moment on this concept of the interview, because something very different is happening during that interview besides just information seeking. Police are trained not to listen only to the content of your answers, but to observe the way in which you answer the questions. Your body language, the way you hold yourself, the words you choose to use when you answer those questions. This is called behavioral analysis. And the suggestion during police training is that if officers are trained well enough and study their suspect well enough, they can turn themselves into human lie detectors. So let's see how this plays out. This is a page, I'm not sure if you can see this, this is a page from a handout that is used by one of the most prolific police interrogation companies in the United States. This is a handout describing behavioral analysis. On the left-hand side, you have deceptive denials. These are things that people who are lying say. And on the right-hand side, you have truthful denials. These are things that people who are telling the truth say. So let's take a look. I didn't take that money. That means you're lying. I didn't do that to her. That means you're lying. Contrast that with, I did not rob anyone, I did not rape her. That means you're telling the truth. Let's keep going. These are slides used by the most prolific police interrogation company in the United States during trainings, still used to this day in all 50 states. Again, on the left-hand side, you have attributes that are supposed to be shown by people who are telling the truth during the interview, and on the right-hand side, you have attributes that are supposed to be shown by people who are lying during the interview. So let's take a look. A truthful person is composed, concerned, cooperative, direct, sincere, and open, pretty much a Boy Scout. A truthful person makes smooth posture changes. A truthful person has frontal alignment. Don't turn that body. A truthful person leans forward and has open palms. But let's look at the liars. The liars have barriered posture, right? The liars make frequent gestures, which probably means me because I know I talk with my hands a lot. The liars put their hand over mouth or eyes. And look here, if you can. Liars say, I don't know. Liars say, I can't recall. Liars refer to God or religion. My God, I would have never done such a thing. This is still in use in police trainings to this day, all around the country. If this sounds absolutely insane to you, research would agree with you. Of course, researchers have tested these claims over and over and over again, and virtually every independent study shows that they are bogus. Interrogation trainers claim these techniques are up to 85% accurate, but in reality, when they're tested, people who are trained in these techniques are only right about 45 to 60% of the time, which is basically a coin toss, right? The truth is there is no such thing as a human lie detector, but the problem is that police too often are trained to believe that there is, that they can detect deception during the interview process. And when they detect deception or believe that they do, then we move on to the next stage of questioning, which is the interrogation. So that brings me to the second error, the coercion error. And I speak here not necessarily only of legally defined coercion, but of psychological coercion. Once you've got that innocent person inside the interrogation room, how do they decide? How are they motivated to confess to a crime that they didn't commit? Well, the interrogation is very different than the interview. The interview is these sort of open-ended questions, but interrogation is targeted. It is purposeful. Police are trained. You only interrogate someone whom you already believe to be guilty. That is key. Because the purpose of interrogation is not to discover the truth. It is to obtain a statement from somebody you already believe to be guilty. So it's different than the interview. It's police dominated. It's manipulative. It can be deceptive. And it is targeted at getting the statement. So here's how that works. Let's say you're in the interrogation room. Police officer will come in. They're trained to come into the room, often with some papers in their hand. It could be anything. It could be a Chinese takeout menu, but just have something in your hand. And you say to the suspect, I have in my hand the results of our investigation. We've been looking into this crime for 2 weeks, and I've got it all right here. I know you did this crime. In fact, the only thing I don't know is why you did this crime. Does this sound familiar? Right? I know everything you've done, down to the last detail. And of course, we know that police officers are allowed to lie during the stage of interrogation. I've got 2 witnesses in the room next door who say that they saw you doing this crime. I found your DNA at the scene. I found your fingerprints on the gun. Now imagine this is you in the room, right? And you're innocent. Of course, what do? What are you talking about? You've made a huge mistake. I didn't do this. I would never do such a thing, right? But officers are trained to shut down those denials. Interrupt the suspect. Don't let the words come out of their mouth. Because the theory goes, the more a person asserts their innocence, the more psychologically attached they get to the notion of their innocence, the harder it is to break them. So don't even let the words get out of your mouth. Instead, continue this process of confrontation, relentless confrontation. I know you did this crime. You're not convincing anybody. You're just making it worse for yourself. I've got the evidence here. This is your one opportunity, and on and on and on, sometimes for hours. The point here is to reduce a suspect down to hopelessness. If this was you and it went on for hours and hours, eventually you'd start thinking to yourself, my God, this guy really thinks I did it. I don't know what he's talking about, but he says he has witnesses who saw me, who have identified me. There's been some horrible mistake here, but he's not even letting me say I'm innocent. I'm really in trouble. No one's going to believe me. He doesn't believe me. What am I going to do? And that is the goal of interrogation, is to bring that suspect down to hopelessness. I am screwed. What can I do? What can I do? And at that moment, police officers are trained to offer the suspect an out at that moment of hopelessness. Right? Look, there are 2 kinds of people in this world. There are people who are evil predators, who are just born evil, monsters who enjoy the act of killing or raping, who stalk their victims, who have probably done this before and who are going to go out and do this again. And you know what happens to people like that. We know how the system treats people like that. But then there are other kinds of people in this world. People just like you or me, everyday folks, good-hearted people who make mistakes, who get frustrated, who snap in a moment of pressure, who do something that they regret later. And as long as you show the world that you regret it, of course you know how the system treats people like that. It's understandable. It'll be better. It'll be easier. So which one are you? And that's how you get a confession. Because when that suspect is reduced down to hopelessness, there's no way I can assert my innocence. He's telling me I'm cornered, I'm out of options. That's when your best day becomes being that second person, the not so bad person, the understandable person, the person someone will want to help. That's why a key part of the interrogation is the introduction of what they call themes that offer moral justifications for why you might have committed this crime, because there's always the choice. Either you're the monster or you're just a person who made a mistake. So in sex cases, for example, there's actually a book, Anatomy of Interrogation Themes, that offers police interrogators all the various themes that they could offer during the interrogation for why it's okay to have done these things, okay? In sex cases, it could be either you're the evil predator, right? Either you're the horrible, stereotypical sex offender, or maybe this really, you didn't mean for this to happen. It just started off as accidental. No big deal, right? Maybe, right, we've all heard this, maybe she really asked for it by dressing provocatively and flirting with you, and you reacted like any healthy adult man would. Maybe, you just intended to show love to her, but she rejected you and you lost your temper, like anyone would. These are themes from the manual of police interrogation. Maybe your wife or your girlfriend wasn't meeting your sexual needs. A man's got to do what a man's got to do, right? All of these themes are offered. It wasn't that bad. A common one, you need treatment or counseling. If you say you did this, let me go get you counseling and the help you need. These are common themes that offer the out during interrogation. Okay, let's talk quickly about the third error. We've talked about misclassification, we've talked about coercion, and now the third error is contamination. This error answers the question, once an innocent person decides to confess or is motivated to confess to a crime that he didn't commit, how does he know what to say about that crime? Well, what we see when we look through videotaped interrogations in proven false confession cases is we see during the course of the interrogation, police officers leaking out, often bit by bit, details about the crime by using leading questions during the interrogation. If they're not getting anywhere with a suspect, come on, you know you didn't just stab her once, you know it was 6 times, right? Come on, why are you saying this happened at 4 p.m.? I know it was after dark, it was almost 9 o'clock at night when this happened. You're not fooling anybody. And on and on and on. What you see are drip by drip by drip, these details come out, and the suspect rehearses them, incorporates them into a narrative, and rehearses that narrative over and over, adding details each time, until by the end of that interrogation, those details have been woven together into a story that sounds true because much of it is based in the fact that the officer knows about the crime. That's when the prosecution can then walk into court and say, well, this is a corroborated confession because she knew that the person was stabbed 7 times and this happened at 9 p.m. when in fact that information was fed during the interrogation. So this is the contamination error, and I want to move now on to 2 of our examples because I want to make sure that we get to these examples and we have time to take a look at them both. The first example that I have for you, like I say, is not a sex case, but it's a case of a murder from the town of Crozet, Virginia, which is a town not too far from Charlottesville, actually. This is a case from 2003 involving the murder of a woman named Nola Charles. Nola lived on a street in Crozet, Virginia called Kling Lane. Crozet is a small town. The houses were modest. It was one of these old corporate towns that kind of sprang up after a corporation decided to open nearby. And all the homes on Kling Lane looked the same. Nola lived there with her daughter, Wendy, who was a teenager, and her young 3-year-old son. One night in February of 2003, in the middle of the night, it was a snowstorm, dead of night, her home lit on fire. Fire department shows up, it's a huge blaze, they put out the fire, they go upstairs, and upstairs they find the body of Nola Charles in her bed, and she has a knife in her back. And then they go to the bedroom down the hallway, and they find the body of the 3-year-old son who had died from smoke inhalation. Wendy, the teenage daughter, had a bedroom on the 1st floor and had escaped the fire, so she survived. The police realize that this is a murder case, a case in which Nola was stabbed and the fire was lit to cover up the murder. So they begin investigating at once, and long story short, they settle on a theory in which Wendy, you recall, was a teenager. Wendy's 2 friends, Rocky and Jessica Fugit, they were neighbors, lived on Kling Lane also. Both teenagers, they were brother and sister. Rocky and Jessica Fugit, they believed, were involved. You see, Wendy had complained to her friends how her mom wouldn't let her do what she wanted to do, wouldn't let her dress the way she wanted to dress, wouldn't let her hang out with who she wanted to hang out with. And Rocky and Jessica, both of whom suffered from mental illness, it was believed, took matters into their own hands. So the police go and they arrest Rocky and Jessica, And they question them both, and long story short, they both confess to being involved and actually lead the police to a weapon in a field, in a snowy field that had been used to bludgeon Nola Charles before she was stabbed. It had her DNA on it. So case closed against Rocky and Jessica. They sure look guilty. But the police believe that there are more people involved than just Rocky and Jessica, so they keep questioning them. Who else was there? And they rattle off this list, a long list of individuals in their high school class who they did not like, who they didn't get along with. It's about 5 or 6 other people. And at the end of that list was Robert Davis, right there. Robert was 18 years old. He was in high school with Rocky and Jessica. He rode the bus with them every day. They bullied him every day. They picked on him every day on the bus. Robert was of average IQ, average student, good guy, no record, no history. And the police went down this list of 5 or 6 other kids that Rocky and Jessica had named, and one by one they were able to rule them out because each one had an alibi, except for Robert. Robert was home alone that night sleeping. He had no one who could corroborate his alibi. So they bring in Robert for questioning on February 22nd, 2003. They bring him in, they pick him up close to midnight, actually, and they begin questioning him at 2 in the morning for about 5 hours about his potential involvement in the murder of Nola Charles along with Rocky and Jessica. And eventually, he confesses to stabbing Nola Charles. And I want to show you with those 3 errors in mind, misclassification, coercion, contamination, how they get a confession out of Robert Davis.
Let's go ahead and tell Robert what he's charged with. Robert, you're charged with the murder of Nola Charles, of Thomas Charles. You're going to be charged with the attempted murder of the 2 Charles daughters, Katie and Wendy. You're charged with breaking and entering with the intent to commit larceny and a nighttime as well. You're charged with robbery. Now it's really gotten serious, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
Exactly right. And you would not be charged with that, Robert, if we didn't have reason to believe or know that you were in that house during the time that things took place in that house. Now this is the time right here, Robert, where you need to step up and say what you saw, what happened, because we already got most of it. And I tell you what, if you will speak for yourself, then you're in that house by yourself and doing everything yourself. And you're going to get the blunt.
I'm not gonna lie to you.
And start telling the truth.
I am telling you the truth. I am telling you the truth. I had nothing to do with this. I swear to God, I swear to God on my life right now that I did not do nothing of this matter. I had nothing to do with this. I will take a polygraph test right now to prove to you that I did not have nothing to do with this. You know and I know that I'm not capable of doing something like this. This means I did not kill nobody. I cannot even kill a fucking fly, man.
Okay, so this is how it starts out for Robert, right? Remember I talked about the coercion error, the presentation of the case as rock solid, the belief that we know you did this and there's no way you're going to get out of this. Well, that's what this is, right? This accusation. And there's no way you're going to convince us that you didn't do this, Robert. They say to him, we have reason to believe, we have reason to know you were in that house that night. And this is the time to own up to it. Now, of course, Robert, like any of us, protests his innocence. But did you notice what he said? Swear to God. I swear to God, I could never do this. I couldn't even kill a fucking fly, is what he says. And that sort of qualified statement, I couldn't even kill a fly, so I couldn't do this, is another red flag under behavioral analysis. So Robert's got 2 problems. He says, swear to God, and he says, I couldn't even kill a fly. And they notice that. And they continue to accuse him. Now, interestingly enough, Robert does say at this point, please let me take a polygraph. In fact, he goes on over the course of this interrogation 6 times to beg for a polygraph to prove his own innocence, which, according to police interrogation training manuals, should be a red flag for innocence. But these officers don't key into that. They're focused on swear to God, they're focused on their other stuff, and they continue to accuse Robert. But here you see Robert acting just like any of us would do. All right, let's see what happens next. Oh, one other thing. They do tell Robert, this is the time, right? Did you catch that now? This is the time. If you're going to tell us what happened now, we've got to do it now. What's fascinating to me is that these commonly used police interrogation techniques, they were developed in like the 1930s, 1940s to replace physical interrogation, which back in the day was the third degree. All this came in to replace the third degree, and it was thought to be very progressive at the time. But how did those folks who created interrogation techniques in the 40s, where did they get their ideas from? From high-pressure sales manuals, right? This is your last opportunity. This price is only available today. Get it now or the price is going to go up. Same tactic. This is the time, Robert. I'm giving you this one chance, or I'm going to walk out of here and the book's going to get thrown at you, right? It is the same high-pressure sales tactic. All right, let's move on.
You know your skin is the worst thing in the world as far as dust. You can't even see it. Dust is made of most of us human thin skin. That can be picked up, that DNA. That stuff right there, if you touched anything, the glove part can be picked up and match with the shirt. The same thing with the gloves. I can match it to the exact letter you wore. What is it there? What you were? You were there. The evidence shows you were there. The evidence shows you. I can't lie about the evidence.
Well, he can lie about the evidence, and he just did lie about the evidence because in this case there was zero physical evidence recovered from that crime scene that linked Robert Davis to it in any way at all. But of course Robert doesn't know that, right? Who does know that police officers are allowed to lie? Much less lie about lying, which is what this guy just did. So this is part of the process, right, of bringing Robert down to hopelessness. We saw the accusation, we saw him react. I'd like to think, just like any one of us would do, this is ridiculous, let me take a lie detector test, I couldn't possibly do this, I swear to God, I'm innocent. And they got to move him off that, so this is part of that process of bringing him down to hopelessness. Robert, I got your DNA on the scene, the evidence shows you were there. Sort of insinuating that it's touch DNA or skin cells. Somehow they found his skin cells like dust at the scene, like a trail of breadcrumbs at the scene. And this affects Robert, right? It's scary to hear this. And he starts thinking, as any of us would, wow, this guy really believes I did this. Wow, this guy who says he can't lie to me is saying they found my DNA at the scene. I don't know how that's possible, but I'm in a whole lot of trouble, right? So let's see what happens next.
I told your mom that I would sit here and try to keep you from the most ultimate punishment you can get. And I'm trying to do that, and you're not even helping me to help you. I can't do no more. I can't speak for you, son. The only way you can get out of this is by talking the truth and saying you're a part of it. And the thing is, you're not going to get out of it, Robert. I'm not going to lie to you. You're not going to get out of it. But you might save your life. And the thing is, if you don't come out and tell the truth and admit to whatever part you did, then when we go to a criminal judge, I can't say that you cooperated, and they're going to put you away for 90 years. You tried to cooperate 90 years, if not worse. And now, if you cooperate, the judge is in control. The judge looks at a guy and goes, man, he cooperated. You didn't cooperate. There's a lot of people in this house. A lot of people have different roles. If you were just in the house, that's one thing. Standing guard or something. One thing. Being in the house is one thing. Doing other things is another thing. Let's establish. Let's do this. Don't. We know you were there. Oh, it's not. We know you were there. Oh, it's not there. It's not that big of a deal. If you were just in the house, Ron, it's not that big of a deal. I was not in the house. If you cooperate with me, then I can work with the Commonwealth and say that you cooperate with me. But son, if you don't cooperate with me,
that I can't do that. And that I can't tell your mom that I can save you from the ultimate. I start telling your mom the truth and trying to help your mom. I can't do that. I can't tell her honestly, I can save Robert because Robert will work with me. And I was killing you on that phone back there. Your mom is upset. She loves you, Robert, no matter what. She's loving you. And I'm doing the best to try to keep that family tie alive. No matter what you've done, she said, I still love him. He's my son. No matter what he's done. And I said, Sandra, I know. And I'm trying to get him to work with me. If he works with me, I will do everything I can to help you see him and get through this. But if I can't do that, I can't do that without him telling me the truth.
Okay, so now the pressure is turning up, right? Robert's in there by himself. It's the middle of the night. He's been told that they believe he murdered Nola Charles and her son. He's been told that they found his DNA, the gold standard of proof, at the scene. He's been brought down to that point of hopelessness. And then this is the choice he's given. Be the cooperator or don't. And what happens if he is not the cooperator? The death penalty. The ultimate punishment. It's as clear as day, and maybe if he's somehow lucky enough to escape that, 90 years in prison. I mean, this is very explicit, right? He's working with his mom, trying to save his life. How does Robert save his life? By taking the other road, being the cooperator. That way they can go in front of the judge and say, hey, he cooperated, and everything will be just fine, is the implication. Notice, too, the way that Robert's mom is being used here as a piece of this puzzle. Robert's 18, but he lives at home. He's a high school student. He's very close with his mother. She's a single mother. He's her only child. And by saying to him, I was just on the phone with your mom, and she wants you to confess too, they're giving Robert permission. They're letting him save face in front of the person he loves the most. Don't worry, your mom already thinks you did this. No big deal. The judge is going to understand. She understands. Everybody's going to understand. Just tell me what you did. Right? This is the choice that Robert is given. So let's keep moving here. This works on Robert. This process of being brought down to hopelessness and then being offered these two choices. Either you're the cooperator or you're not. The cooperator is somebody who is just sort of there, right? Versus the evil person, someone else. And so this works on Robert. He decides to confess. That brings us then to the third error. Once he's decided to confess, how does he know what to say? Because as Robert himself tells us, he wasn't actually there. Let's watch.
What can I say that I did to get me out of this? I held her down when they tied her up. Yeah. And then I hit her 2 times. Because they said if I didn't, it would be...
Wait a minute, I got somebody else clubbing her, Robert. I got someone else doing that act. You did another act. You know what that act is. And we know. And that's the thing that has something on it that's yours.
What would that be?
Robert, I'm going to come straight out and tell you what I'm getting. All right? Since you're not going to tell me. All right? You did another act. All right? You did another act to that lady. And you can sit here and say, I got 3 other stories telling me what you did. And why you keep not wanting to say it, because either way, clubbing or doing the other act are the same thing. Except the fact you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Did you? And I'm going to ask you. I'm going to bring it out as a question, but I know the answer. Did you or did you not stab that woman?
No. I would not lie to you about that. I did not stab her. I had the knife, though, and I don't know if it stabbed her or not, but I didn't stab her. If I did, I didn't mean to.
You know what you did, and you stabbed that woman.
I stabbed her.
We are really going on a long way here with you.
Would it make you feel better if we told you
Yes, sir.
exactly who was with you?
Yes, it would, because I can tell you who I hang out with, and I can tell you that I would not hang out with these people because I don't want to.
But you know that kind of defeats the purpose, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you understand that? Is whenever we have to start telling you what you already know.
This is actually,
But if that helps you, maybe we can do that.
And that's exactly what he does. He tells him, we know you're with Rocky and Jessica, just like he had previously told them that Robert had stabbed Noah, and on and on and on in exactly this way. Drip, drip, drip. Facts about this crime come out over the course of this 5-hour interrogation, and one by one, Robert incorporates them into his narrative until at the end of those 5 hours, he has got a story where committing this crime with people who are definitely guilty, where he knows exactly how the woman was killed, and it sure looks like a corroborated confession to me, right? I love that this investigator says, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? When I have to start telling you what you already know. I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself. This is just like, for those of you who may have seen or remember Making a Murderer, this is just like the moment in Brendan Dassey's interrogation, when the police are trying to get him to say how he murdered a young woman named Teresa Halbach, and he's listing every method of murder he can think of until they finally say, look, Brendan, I'm just going to ask you who shot her in the head. It's the same thing. You see this across every false confession case, this contamination error. So that's how they get the confession out of Robert, and I want to show you this last clip before I move on to the sex abuse interrogation, because it sort of sums up the position of someone like Robert.
do you think about me telling you this is what you're doing
Tonight? Today, I doubt it.
Today you done it.
Now, you'll see a judge Monday.
Why am I lying about all this to you, just so I can go home?
We're not lying.
I am lying to you. I am lying to you full front to your face. I am lying to you.
It's pretty good for a recantation. Why does he say he lied and made up this whole confession, or agreed to parrot back this whole confession? Because he thought he was going to go home. Again, for those of you who have seen Making a Murderer, think back to Brendan Dassey. What did he think was going to happen after he confessed to rape and murder? He looks at his interrogators and says, so am I going to be back at school in time to finish my 6-hour project? Why does Robert think he's going home after confessing to murdering Nola Charles? Why does Brendan Dassey think he's going to go back to school after confessing to murdering Teresa Halbach? It's because of this false choice that is given over the course of the interrogation, right? When you go in front of the judge and we say, hey, this guy cooperated, the implication is that everything will be okay. You're not going to be that evil predator. You're not going to get the ultimate punishment. That's bad. This is good. That's why you see this across proven false confession cases over and over and over again. When you ask folks, why did you confess to a crime that you didn't commit? You hear over and over again, because I just wanted to go home. This is why they think that. So I show you Robert's interrogation, or these excerpts from Robert's interrogation, because it's extreme, it's egregious, right? Not in every interrogation does somebody get threatened with the death penalty. And this interrogation gives us a lot to work with in terms of emotion to suppress. But I show it to you because it illustrates the arc of interrogation so well, the bringing down to hopelessness, and then the giving of an out paired with the fact feeding. That is an arc which we see in every interrogation. Police in all 50 states are trained in the same interrogation techniques that are all founded upon this same arc, whether true confessions or false confessions. They all operate the same way. And so when we tell the story in our motions to suppress about why somebody confessed, this story of what happened to Robert Davis, to a degree, will also be the story of what happened to your client. It will. You just need to know how to tease it out of the interrogation. So I want to show you, so this is the lesson, I think, of Robert Davis. Robert Davis got steamrolled, but that's precisely what interrogation is about. These weren't officers who were wildly acting as rogues, completely out on their own. They were doing what they were trained. Maybe not the fact feeding, they weren't trained to do the fact feeding. But that general process of interrogation is how they were trained. Psychological interrogation is by definition a process of steamrolling, and it will happen in every case. That's what we've got to do when we file motions to suppress, when we look at interrogations, tell the story of the steamroll, okay? Identify the early accusation, identify the relentless accusation, the presentation of the case as rock solid, whether there's lies about the evidence or not. Show the weight of that pressure, show the reduction down to hopelessness, and then show the offering of the out, which very often will be paired with an insinuation, at least, of leniency. Be the bad guy or be the good guy, right? So let's look now at a second interrogation, an interrogation that is nowhere near Robert Davis's interrogation. Robert Davis is 18, it's the middle of the night, 2 a.m. to 7 a.m., he's threatened with the death penalty. It's like he's telling them to their faces that he's lying. It's a bad interrogation. This one is really different. This is a case from California from a few years ago. This is quite recent, 2015 appellate court opinion in California. And it involves a 13-year-old boy named Elias who was accused of sex assault on his friend's little sister, his friend's 3-year-old little sister. Elias lived in an apartment building. His friend also lived in the apartment building, each with their respective families, and Elias would go over to his friend's apartment a lot to play video games, and the video game console was in the bedroom. So Elias is accused of inappropriately touching the 3-year-old AT on the vagina, allegedly during the course of being over at the friend's house playing video games in the bedroom. Elias is 13, he's in school, and this is when the interrogation occurs. It's at school, not at his home. The police officers come, they bring him to the principal's office. They shut the door, but as you'll hear on the audio, this is not videotaped, it's just audio taped. As you'll hear, you can still hear the other kids. It must be passing time or maybe school just let out. You can hear the other kids and the hustle and bustle of the school environment during the interrogation. He's got the police officers in there as well as the principal is also in the room, and Elias is questioned for only 22 minutes. That is it. This is short, okay? And he confesses, or he makes the admission after 12 minutes. This is not 5 hours in the middle of the night, Robert Davis, okay? What happened is AT's mother had gone to the police and reported this alleged abuse. The outcry happened 17 days after the abuse allegedly occurred. But she went to the police only after her family had been evicted from the apartment building. So part of Elias's defense was that AT's mom thought Elias's family had somehow put the landlord up to evicting them, and this was her retaliation, okay? AT, after her mom went to the police, AT was brought in for a forensic interview, given a doll, and she says, Elias touched me, and points somewhere in the midsection of the doll, sort of like stomach area, arguably could be genitals, but it's really just like the middle of the doll. Elias's defense was that, he was at his friend's house playing video games with his friend in the room. The 3-year-old comes in, needs to use the bathroom, asks Elias for help removing her pants because she can't work the zipper. He does that, and that's it. Okay? So, let's listen to this interrogation. I don't have this clipped out the same way I have Robert's clipped out. I excerpted Robert's by pulling out similar tactics. This one I have clipped out chronologically, so the tactics are all interwoven the way an interrogation just normally happens, okay? So let's take a listen.
So I'm going to give you an out here, okay?
Yeah.
You're obviously nervous because you're not telling me the truth about what happened.
What?
And things happen. People have urges, things happen, okay? So what we need to do right now is find out why you're having these urges and why you feel like you want to touch a 3-year-old little girl, okay? Because it did happen. She explained it perfectly. So my question, Arlington, to you is, How many fingers did you put inside of her?
I'm serious. I ain't lying.
So you're telling me that you touched the outside of her, but you did not put fingers inside of her?
No.
Okay, so that's a short clip, but it kind of gives you a sense of how this started. This is not obviously the very beginning. The very beginning, this woman, this detective, introduces herself as Michelle. Hi, Elias, I'm Michelle. And we're going to talk about this thing that's been going on. Elias had heard something about these accusations because his friend's mom had been talking to his mom, so he knew what they were there to talk about. And she jumps into it. Officer Michelle does. She tells him that he's obviously nervous, right? Earlier in a part that I don't have to show you, she says, well, you keep looking at your shoes. So you're obviously nervous. And she says to him, I'm going to give you an out. She jumps right to the choice, right? You know this whole situation, Elias. You know these accusations. So I'm going to give you an out right now. Here's your out. High pressure sales tactic. Let's go. Now's the time. And she accuses him, right? You're not telling me the truth. I know it did happen. And she lies. She explained it perfectly. The victim explained it perfectly. You can see here that these tactics are all kind of jumbled in, all hitting together. It's up to us as lawyers to tease them out and to weave the narrative thread. First accusation, bringing down to hopelessness. The presentation of false evidence, she explained it perfectly. I know you did this. It did happen. And I'm going to give you an out. It's up to us to retell the story, to present the message that all of this jumble being taken together, the message that Elias unquestionably heard during the interrogation room. And of course, there's contamination, like really good contamination by Officer Michelle. She's just telling him exactly what she thinks happened. So let's keep going. Remember, all of this is just in the span of a 12-minute period before he makes the admission.
You're almost there. You're almost being honest with me. And the best thing for you right now is to be honest with me so we can figure out what's going on with you. Okay? Because something is going on with you that's not healthy for you. Okay? So I know that you touched her bare vagina. And you know that you touched her bare vagina.
Not like forehand, not like doing it. I never did it.
But you put your fingers on her bare vagina.
No.
Okay? So again, what do we tease out? I know that you did this and you know that you did this. Relentless accusation. You are getting nowhere with me, Elias. I know you did this. We're only here to talk about the out that I'm going to give you, right? The process of accusation. The leniency. The best thing for you right now, Elias, is to be honest with me so that we can figure out what's going on with you. The suggestion of help. This is really about you. I want to figure you out. Can you help me do that? Right? And of course, more contamination. Like Elias knows exactly what she wants him to say. You put your fingers on her bare vagina. Boom. Okay. Let's see what happens next.
Why are you curious? Why were you curious about her? Why did you want to touch her?
How?
The way you touched her.
Why did I touch her?
You put your hand on her vagina.
I did.
Her mom walked in and saw you.
No, she didn't. But again, this is coming fast, right? This is boom, boom, boom. And none of it is that bad. There are no threats of the death penalty. There's no begging for a polygraph. There's no, I couldn't kill a fucking fly. This is coming at him fast. And it is not as coercive as Robert Davis, but it doesn't need to be for a 13-year-old. It just doesn't need to be as strong, right? So she asks, why were you curious about her? This is the first person to introduce this notion of curiosity is Officer Michelle, not Elias. Why is she bringing up this notion of curiosity? That's the minimizing theme. The out that I'm offering you, the help that I'm going to be giving you, the figuring you out. Oh, you were just curious, right? That's not a big deal. Kids are curious all the time. That's the theme that she's offering him. So again, contamination, accusation, lying, and the curiosity theme. And so here's where the theme really takes hold and results in the admission.
Okay, fair enough. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable that you did not use your fingers to penetrate her vagina. but I know that you touched her vagina with your hands, with your fingers. Okay? Okay. Why did you feel like you wanted to do that? What did it make you feel like? Was it exciting? What was it? People your age are curious. That just happens sometimes. I understand that. Your body's changing, things are happening to you. If you found it exciting, then
No, I didn't find it. But then after that, I thought it was nice.
So after you touched her vagina with your fingers, you thought it was nasty.
Yeah, like when I was smaller, my friends one time showed me a vagina, and I thought it was disgusting.
So were you just curious when you touched her this time?
Curious? Well, I've been curious about things.
Fair enough. Did you find it exciting?
I think it's disgusting.
But you did it, so there must be something there. There must be some reason why you did it. You know, this happens sometimes. This happens to people sometimes. There's a driving force that you need to deal with. So the fact that you did it tells me that you found it exciting.
I'm serious. I'm dead serious. I don't find it exciting. I think it's like kind of gross.
But you did it.
For curiosity.
How long do you think you touched her?
Well, honestly, I only touched it for like around 3 or 4 seconds because I was in the middle of the game.
Ken, I don't know what's up with that background noise, by the way. That's weird. Must be somebody's cell phone ring. But that's it. That's the grand admission. I only did it for 3 or 4 seconds because I was in the middle of a game. That's the confession. And you can see how this curiosity theme actually works with Elias. I mean, Officer Michelle's techniques are not terribly sophisticated here. She is relentless. You did this. You touched her vagina with your fingers. No, Elias, you touched her vagina with your fingers. Relentless in that. And she offers the out of curiosity. Kids your age are curious. This is normal. Did you do this just for curiosity? And it works. In 12 minutes, it works with this 13-year-old. Now, or at least it gets to a statement that the state says is a confession, which I think is also totally consistent with his defense that he just pulled down her pants because she needed to use the bathroom. But this is the confession that the state used and secured his adjudication as a juvenile for a sex crime against AT on the basis of that statement at the very bottom of the screen. Okay. So, is this suppressible? This is a 20-minute long interrogation. Officer Michelle sounds so nice. She does not sound scary, right? And that's exactly what the trial court said. Voluntary. Absolutely, I'm letting this in. This was very gentle questioning by a female detective who was calm. Her questions were short. They point out that Elias, although 13, he was on the upper end of the intelligence scale. This is not a child with impairments or disabilities. In fact, he was the one that was using bigger words than Officer Michelle. The questions were not convoluted, said the trial court. There's no confusion. He didn't misunderstand what she was asking. A younger person, maybe they could be confused, but this was really straightforward. And it kind of was straightforward, right? Trial court said, well, where the interview took place was not intimidating. We can argue about school principal's office, but, this is not a police station, which the trial court felt mitigated in favor of voluntariness. And the trial court said, sometimes Elias even asked a question or two, and that was a give and take that made me feel that this was just a conversation. Totally voluntary. This is a ruling that 99% of the courts in the country would have made on this kind of a confession, right? Appellate court reverses. Involuntary confession. Throws the case out. Why was this involuntary? This is a brilliant ruling. A brilliant ruling. The ruling is essentially the process of police interrogation that I have been telling you about is what made it involuntary. The basic working of psychological interrogation is what made that statement you just heard involuntary. Okay? The court says the police projected a rock-solid belief that the suspect was guilty and all denials will fail. Yeah, she did that. That happens in 99% of interrogations. But she sure did that, right? She ignored Elias's exculpatory or innocuous answers to questions. We know that's what police are trained to do. Repeatedly referred to guilt as an established fact. We know that's what police are trained to do in every interrogation. The officer displayed interest only in confirming details such as why Elias committed the act and never allowed for the possibility that he might not have committed the unlawful act. Well, that's interrogation 101. You only interrogate the guilty, right? That's what police are trained. But here, this court sees that as contributing to the pressures and the involuntariness of the interrogation room. The questioning was relentless. That's that process of bringing down to hopelessness. And then the court goes on. The police offered Elias a forced choice question, right? Which, it said, can easily induce a false confession. The officer offered Elias two possible explanations for the sexual touching that she said happened, both of which she told him were completely understandable. Either you were a curious 13-year-old, and we've all been there, or you found it exciting, right? And he picked curiosity. That's what you just heard. Offended by the suggestion, he was excited. Elias agreed to the more acceptable alternative that he was just curious. Not a big deal. And the court noted contamination. Noted the fact feeding, right? Officer Michelle is totally relentless about what she needs him to say. It is a clear message. Elias said nothing during his interrogation that only a guilty suspect would know. Rather, all the differing descriptions of where and how the alleged improper touching took place were first offered by Officer Michelle. This is an awesome ruling because it recognizes that these psychological pressures that are deployed in every single interrogation are inherently coercive. Just as the Miranda court recognized back in the 1960s, this court gets it. These pressures are deceptive. Interrogation is not just a conversation. It's not just a give and take. Lies about the evidence matter not just as one factor in a list of factors, but because they're part of this process of reducing down to hopelessness. Promises of leniency matter not just as a factor in a list of factors, but because that's the out of hopelessness. These are the things around which interrogation is structured. Every interrogation in every room in every state around the country. And these are the kinds of rulings that are starting to come out more and more with videotaped interrogations when lawyers are able to tease that narrative out of the interrogation and show the psychological manipulation that is at the heart of every interrogation. Show the steamroll because it is there in your interrogations. This process that happened to Robert is the same process that happened to Elias. It's the same process that happened to Brendan Dassey. It's the same ones over and over again. Elias has a happy ending. Well, this took a couple of years for him to get here, of course. He was on home confinement until he got this appellate court ruling, but his conviction was reversed and vacated. Robert did not have so happy of an ending after this interrogation happened. He had one of the best attorneys in Virginia who made all the right arguments, and still the trial court did not suppress that confession. Despite the death penalty threats, despite the whole thing, came into evidence, and at that point, Robert entered an Alford plea. No other evidence against him. Entered an Alford plea and accepted 28 years in prison. Robert spent over a decade in prison before the governor of Virginia granted his request for a pardon on the basis of actual innocence just about a year ago. And he's now free, living in Charlottesville, completely exonerated, but it took him a long time to get there. So, I don't know if we have any time for questions at all, but that's what I have prepared. All right, we're done, so thanks very much.